My name is Haley Trefen. I am a public library consultant here at the Indiana State Library, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2023 Annual Report and Bookkeeping Workshop. This morning, we will be led through the annual report by Angela Fox. Angela works in the Library Development Office, and in addition to being the face behind the annual report, she is also the LSTA and Federal Projects Consultant. And she goes out with me and we do trustee trainings together. So, all right, let's get this started. Let me unmute you.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here and we'll just dive right in. Look good? Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here either online or in person on a Thursday morning for what is sure to be a day of fun, or at least my part. We're going through several hundred questions here, so strap in. And I will say, if you've never done this workshop with me, especially if you've looked at the handout online before you logged in, you may wonder how we are going to get through all of those slides. First of all, we're going to talk very fast. Secondly, we are going to fly through the back half. When we hit the halfway mark, when we hit intermission and we take a quick break, which we will do. So if you need to top off your coffee or use the restroom, at that point, I can almost guarantee we will not be anywhere near halfway through the slides, and it is going to look like lunch is a lost hope. And I promise you, we will get through all of them. Most of the confusing stuff tends to be in the front half, plus I have a little additional information. Speaking of which, if you've done this with me a million times before, that additional information, the updates for 2023, I have tried to put right towards the very beginning here. So if you want to listen to those and hop off, I promise I won't be personally offended. But we're just going to head right on in there. Oh, it's not forwarding. There we go. We'll do it that way. Okay. So what is the annual report? As many of you probably know, it is tied together with the public library survey that is a nationwide effort by IMLS to collect information on all of the libraries in the United States. It is the only nationwide effort. PLA does a lot of surveys, but they are not quite to the scale that IMLS does, in the sense that we really try to get every single outlet, every single branch, every single bookmobile recorded. So IMLS requires that we ask a number of questions that we refer to as data elements. If I say something about a data element, it's just their word for question that we're required to ask. But in addition to the IMLS data element, at some point, our state library said, hey, rather than do any questions we have on separate surveys, we're just going to roll it into this required one and give you guys one mammoth survey to take once a year, and then try not to pester you about surveys for the rest of the year. So depending on how you feel about super long surveys, that may or may not be a good thing. So this one does have, as I said, the IMLS core questions. The questions that we add, almost all of them relate to standards in some way or another. This is the one way that we can really check in on with standards. And then overall, just the whole purpose of the survey is a way to check in on the state of libraries in the nation, on the health. Are they getting more revenue, less revenue? Are there more or less people coming in? What are they doing? What are the trends programming wise or purchasing wise? So it really is a bird's eye view. And I mention this in part because I know sometimes we have people get a little anxious over their numbers. I've had people contact me and say, well, if I'm not allowed to record this, this is going to look really bad on us. And I promise you, this is really meant to be a part of a national view of libraries, and no one is looking at your library in particular and pointing and saying, I wonder what the problem with them is. They didn't do 900 programs. That is not what this is for. So what's new for 2023? I promised you I'd get to it right away. So before I get started, there's quite a few slides, and we have fewer changes than we have in several years. Most of the slides, we've changed, are just minor things that we've done to try to make this a little easier to navigate. Up front, the updates that we made on our end, we try to add more pre-fills. There's some things, because of the way Bibliostat formats the report that we would love to pre-fill for you, and we just cannot. But we did try to add some more when possible. So if you're a system that has multiple branches, we were able to preload the branch hours for you. If you have local databases that you type in every year, we loaded those for you. If you have local reciprocal covenants, we loaded those for you. So we tried to take some of those text heavy or question heavy questions and load the, or I'm sorry, number heavy questions and load those for you ahead of time. We have some automated calculations that we had to turn off in previous years because COVID hours and partial hours were screwing with them, and we turned them back on. And then a lot of the updates that we did are really of a show your work variety. We aren't changing the questions, we're just breaking them out a little more, or we're trying to explain how we got the number. It actually shouldn't result in more work for you, especially because these are all, well, one is an automated calculation, one's a pre-fill. I'll get into them. You'll mostly see it in section 2 and section 3. But again, it's not changing the content of what we're collecting, just sort of the way that we're doing it. And then we revised section 7, which had to do with librarians for clarity. So rather than try to explain without visuals, here we go. So for the registrations, the way that we clarified this, and it is worth noting if you've done this before in years past, because it's not quite the same. And I don't want you to go through, rote memorization and just throw in the numbers that you think belong there, because they're in a slightly different order this year. So last year and every year prior, we have asked about non-resident registered users. And if you see on the screen there, question 3 in that section, total number of non-resident registered users. If you were a person who clicked on the little instruction link next to it, or were listening really closely in one of these workshops or something, you may have caught that that was supposed to include all non-resident cards. So student, school, library employees, those 3 things that were listed below were supposed to be rolled up into 03, along with paid non-resident registered users. And what we found is that most people were putting only the paid ones there. They were putting that as a separate subcategory instead of adding paid plus everything that followed it, which kind of makes sense. We have the total ahead of the subtotals. So this year, we switched things around a little. We actually made that question only for paid non-resident registered users. Then we asked about the non-paid, like we always do. And then we threw in an automated calculation at the end. So you won't have to do anything, but that's the one that will total all of them. So the number that we were trying to collect last year in 003, now we just do the math ourselves and collect it in 007. So again, just trying to make that a little easier and a little more intuitive when you're going through that section. In section 3, the political subdivisions, this should be pre-filled for you, but I beg you, even if stuff is pre-filled, at least take a look at it and make sure it's not wrong. We had a library find out that one of their subdivisions was entered as a contract, and it was supposed to be taxed or vice versa, but it made a big difference on some of their numbers. So take a look. But anyway, in previous years, what you saw for each subdivision in your library service area was a group that looked like that on the left, where you had the subdivision name, and then you either had unit for taxed or unit for contract and the population. And I think a lot of people, that format just didn't make a lot of sense. So this year we sort of streamlined it, and what you'll see is now on the right, we'll ask you the political subdivision name, and then we'll put the population either in the line for taxation or the line for contract, and that's it. And then previously, we had asked for the total district population just taxed, and then for the total population taxed and contract. This year, we just break out contract, so you can see where we got that total number. So again, it's not anything extra you have to add, but we're just trying to make it so that people reading this report for the first time, people looking at the data can understand where those numbers came from. And then finally, that change in section 7 that I referred to, we have always asked for the total number of all librarians with an ALA MLS degree. And then a few questions later said, how many total number of librarians, including the ALA MLS? And we've tried phrasing it different ways throughout the year, but we always had that question was being answered with just the non-MLS librarians. We were getting totals in 4 that were less than the number in 1, which is impossible. You can't have a total of degreed librarians plus non-degreed librarians and somehow be less. So we knew that question was a little confusing. So we just reworded it this year. So, and this is where, if you've done it before, just watch out. Now we ask for all librarians up front. So that first question is every single person in your library who goes by the title of librarian. And then later on we say, hey, out of that total above, how many of those had a degree? So we're trying a little different phrasing to see if we don't have quite so many follow-up questions and confusions around that. So that was our updates. As far as IMLS updates go, and I'm so sure you guys are going to be just devastated by this first one, we got rid of all the COVID questions. So all of those about the library closures and adding Wi-Fi and all of those questions that showed up in section 1 and section 15 are finally gone. It took several years for it to happen because government, but they are gone. We removed one question on the number of current electronic serial subscriptions, and that's just because IMLS stopped collecting it a couple years ago, and nobody that we could tell was really using it for any purpose around here. So if you still want that number, feel free to collect it. We're no longer asking for it. Also because it kind of became meaningless in the age of Hoopla and Overdrive. People weren't just reporting their digital New York Times, they were reporting, we have 9,000 different titles you can access. So it didn't mean anything. And then finally, in section 9, we added the word physical to circulation of all children's physical materials, because we found out that some states were encouraging their libraries to include physical and electronic checkouts and other states were not. And it seemed like a really good idea for consistency's sake to get everyone on the same page. As far as other IMLS updates, because it has been really, I know, rough the last couple of years. So I'm so happy to say that they put a moratorium on new questions this year. So there is absolutely nothing new coming down the road from IMLS. There are no new questions that you'll have to worry about, which is fantastic. Next year is going to be different in a good way. I think people are going to be really happy with the changes coming down the road next year, because we are getting rid of some deadweight questions and we are trying to take a lot of the burden off of the electronic numbers. So Hoopla, Overdrive, things like that. And I'm not going to get into it now because it'll just confuse things. But I'm so excited, it's really hard to hold back. But for now, the good news is no new questions. One other note, we do have an annual report kind of landing page on our website, and we'll be updating that. I know our tech guru is working on updating that, and I know some of the newer things will be going up relatively soon. There's not going to be anything radically different about this, except for those of you who just 2 hours with me is not enough. You're like, what do I need in my life? More Angela talking at me. I'm going to be recording a series of very short videos that correspond to different parts of the report. I'm talking like 4 to 10 minutes, I think is what we're looking at so far. And the longest one is going to be how to navigate the report for first-time directors or people who haven't used Bibliostat before. But those tutorials are going to address issues in specific sections, kind of things to look out for, things that I would like to point out, but I don't have time because we have like 800 questions in 2 hours. So if you find yourself in a section that is giving you fits and you want to, again, listen to me talk at you this time for 4 or 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, those will be, they will be recorded. We're working on them. And then eventually there will be a link to those on the webpage. So that will be another resource that some of you might find helpful.
We have a couple questions already. Someone asked, are branch managers with MLS degrees counted as librarians?
We can talk about that more in section 7, but the short answer is yes.
Okay, and one more along those lines. Does section 7001 mean we would count and include assistant librarians here?
So again, I can talk about this a little more in section 7, but the very short answer is anyone who is performing the role of a librarian in their job, whether they have the degree or not, should be counted as a librarian. If you have a branch manager who's not doing anything library related, they are overseeing the facilities, they are scheduling, but they're not doing reference, they're not manning a desk, they're not doing anything that you would consider truly librarian, degree or not, you wouldn't count them. So you're going to look at the job itself. Are they doing the job of a librarian, regardless of whether they have a degree? So Okay, so starting the survey, this is one of the sections we used to walk through Bibliostat because Bibliostat. That's who we contract to make the survey for us. So when I refer to Bibliostat, it is an online portal where you log in and you enter all your questions. And we contract that out, and the people who do that, it has its quirks, I'm going to say. It has its quirks. So we try to warn you about its quirks ahead of time. Let me also say it has some wonderful customer service if you need help. But we just do not have a ton of time to talk about starting the survey. So if you're someone who hasn't done it before and you have questions, feel free to come to me. Feel free to look at that tutorial when it's online. Sorts of things I'll be covering. I got way ahead of myself. So we'll come back to that, but the sorts of things I will be covering about walking through the survey, again, I'll try to talk about on a tutorial. As far as the timeline goes, normally this timeline has the report workshop in November. So we are definitely ahead of the curve this year. And that's why some of the materials aren't quite ready, but hopefully we'll have stuff for you very soon. This is a great time to start gathering your data if you haven't already, to think about the reports you need to run. If you're lucky enough to have people who you can kind of tap to help you out with this and do different sections, that's when you're going to want to start thinking about it. The report is still slated to go live in mid-December. If we can get it out any earlier, that's fantastic. I'll let you know, but it should be mid-December at the latest. You'll know when it goes live because I send every director an email that has extensive instructions on where to find the report and how to log in. And each library has one unique login for that library. So if you do have multiple people working on the report, please do not have them working on it at the same time. That will just lead to heartache and grief because you will lose data. January and February, this is when most people are doing their reports to various degree of panic, depending where on that timeline you fall, because they are due March 1st. That includes the signature page. So the survey needs to be filled out and the signature page needs to be to us. The good news is we accept and in fact prefer electronic signature pages. So send them to us via email if you can. Don't feel like you have to overnight them. Okay, there's my ducks in a row joke. So we want you to get your ducks in a row. And because we're doing this early, happy Halloween. So thank you. 6 years running, I'd like to at least keep it fresh for you guys. So the things that you want to keep in mind or keep nearby, contact information for ISL. And I'll have that at the end of this, but feel free to email me directly. I'll have my desk phone number on there. There's also, when I'm not available, you can contact our LDO office. That's for questions about content, how to interpret the report, things like that. You'll want to have Bibliostat's number nearby in case you have problems with the report. If you're entering numbers and you don't think they're saving right or totaling right, or if it's just not letting you jump around the report like you want to, they're the technical people. As I mentioned before, you'll want to have your different reports at hand. And we do have a number of worksheets and help documents, the what goes where handout, worksheets on programming. So those might be good to have to refer to. And because there's so little room for levity in the rest of this report, enjoy the ducks in a row in Halloween garb this year. This is courtesy of the Make Way for Ducklings art in the Boston Public Gardens. And it is just delightful. Apparently they change them up every year, kind of like our children's museum. So again, technical difficulties I mentioned, if it's within the report itself, that's when you'll want to talk to Bibliostat. If it's about the content, that's when you'll want to talk to me. And if you're having issues, things that you might want to look for on your end, if it's a technical issue, are things like, excuse me, firewalls that might be blocking you. A lot of people have browser extensions that block pop-ups, and that can be kind of an issue if you're trying to get the little help block pop-up. So those are things to consider as well. This is what I started rambling about earlier, navigating the survey. So Bibliostat itself, when you log in, you're going to choose the 2023 report, not the 2021. We work with what we have. Things that you'll want to know to navigate, you'll be able to use the side menu to jump around from section to section. You don't have to do this report in order. You can fill out whatever parts you want. You can also use the previous or next buttons. They appear at the top of each page and at the bottom of each page. When you use those, they act as a de facto save. So if you put a number in and then you hit the next button, it's going to be saved. If you put a number in and then decide you want to do a section 3 pages down, be sure to hit the save button before you use that side menu. Let's see. The FAQ at the top is actually an FAQ about the survey itself. So things about how to navigate, the things I'm talking about right at this moment. Whereas the instructions right next to it is a document that's full of instructions for the actual questions. So the things that give you definitions or explain where you would look for the data. You can also find those by clicking on those little help question marks next to each question. As I mentioned, those will come up in a pop-up. So if you're using those, make sure that your computer does allow for pop-ups. And then when I talk about edit checks, clearing edit checks, you'll need to do that by using the note, which is available to the right of each question. Notes, when you click on there, you'll have the option to leave a local or a federal note. The federal notes are the ones that I see. The federal notes are the ones that I pass on to IMLS if I need to. So yes, we can see what you write. Yes, we've had some people express some frustration in there, which is totally understandable. But do know that if you leave something in there, we can read it. And we hope you use that. It's a very helpful field to explain things that might otherwise seem a little odd. The flag is just for your own personal use. If you want to come back to a question and you want to make it easy to come back to a question, you can go and have the report show you only the flagged questions, you know, if that you want to set those aside for a different day. There's so much more I can get into, but again, I know most of you have dealt with this report for years and years and years, and if you're a new director, please feel free to contact me and I can help out with that as well. So general instructions, this is the 2023 report. So we are looking at the entire calendar year from January 1st to December 31st. We want you to report on 2023, except for contact information. So phone numbers, addresses, anything, you know, we need the most current for that. The assessed valuation and tax rate, which we asked about in section 3. Most of you, by the time you fill this out, will have that information for 2024 from DLGF, and you can go ahead and use that. Library board members, oh my goodness, there has been so much turnover in library board members this year. So if you have a turnover while you are completing the report, or if you have someone start in January, or if you've had a bunch during the year, just tell us who is on the board at that moment that you are typing their names in. We want the most recent ones. And then finally, the hourly salaries and benefits, same deal. Give them to us the way that the numbers that they are as you are completing the report. We want the most current ones for that. If you don't know data and you can give us an estimate, please do. It's very helpful. IMLS has ways to kind of impute data and figure out using estimations and make it worth something if you can give us a fairly reasonable estimate. The next two ones are really important. Please enter 0 only if the actual number to report is 0, and enter NA if you know a number is not 0, but you don't know the number and you can't estimate it. So for instance, let's say you get to my perennial favorite 09003, which is successful retrieval of electronic information. And yeah, I have that one memorized because I love it so much. This one gives a lot of people fits, and it's difficult for some people to get that number. If you have, you have databases that people are using, you subscribe to Ancestry, you subscribe to Chilton's or to some of these other ones, but you don't know how to get that information, please don't write down 0, because I'm going to have to follow up with you and say, hey, it says you have 900 databases and 0 people retrieved anything from there, and that seems wrong. So just put NA if you know that that there's a number that you should put in there, but for whatever reason, you don't have it. And I promise we are not going to yell at you. So that's the quick overview. We're going to head right into general information. This hopefully will be one of the easiest sections of the report for you. General information just covers the basics like contact info, addresses, phone numbers, the size of all locations, the operating hours. And I want to stress that with operating hours, please give us the hours that are most representative of 2023 when you're entering them. So if you had hours change during the year, give us the ones that represent the bulk of the year, because we use these numbers to calculate the total numbers of hours open. Again, because we're reporting to IMLS and looking at the health of libraries and the way they serve their communities as a whole. So we're looking at open hours use the ones that made the most sense for 2023. As I mentioned, the COVID questions are gone, which means the automatic calculations are back. And the big change here for those of you with branches are those hours are pre-filled. Respondent identification. The very first question changed, and that's just for clarity's sake. I believe it used to be person who's filling out this report. Now it's survey contact, because we know a lot of libraries have multiple people filling out the report. Just make sure you have a name right there. That is the person I can contact if I have a question. Who do I direct my questions to? Most of this is going to be filled in for you and locked. Please just take a look and make sure that, yep, everything looks good. We didn't transpose some numbers. We didn't put you in the wrong time zone. And if you find that we did, give me a call or shoot me an email and we'll fix that for you. We ask about mailing address. So we ask about whether you have an answering machine, voicemail, or similar technology, URL, and then your email address at the end there. And I've had some people say, we've had a voicemail for, 25 years. Why do you ask us this? So this is one that we did not pre-fill, and it's actually deliberate, as silly as it seems. This is to check standards. This is our only way to really check standards, is with the report to give you the list of things you're required to do and say, hey, are you doing them? It is the honor system. So because we're operating on the honor system, essentially, we're saying, look us in the eye and tell us that you really have that. We want you to tell us to our face that this is still applicable to you. So the standards questions, yes, we make you answer them every single year, but we want you to actually think about, oh, wait, did I do this? Am I meeting that standard? And then be able to answer those honestly. As far as the building questions, we fill those in for you, but please update them if you've had a structural addition or the square footage changed. As far as structural addition or alteration, we're looking at things that would change the actual footprint of the building, so that square footage. So if you added a gazebo or expanded your parking lot or tore down a wall or added an elevator, those are really wonderful alterations. They don't change the square footage, so you don't need to worry about putting that year down or the change. Building hours. If when you get here, it will have a little link that you clicked on, and a table will pop up, and you'll have to fill in those hours. And as I said, please just use the ones that are you used for most of the year. If you have hours that don't easily fit into that format, if you have a branch that closes for lunch, if you have a library that has a winter schedule that is radically different than its summer schedule, then you can use, there will be an open field, narrative field that you can explain that to us. Otherwise, for most people, you're just going to use that table that pops up and fill in Monday opening, Monday closing, Tuesday opening, Tuesday closing. You see how this goes. Total number of hours that the Central Library is open during a week, hours open after 5 o'clock, hours open on Saturday, hours open on Sunday. All of these are relevant to us for standards reasons. All of these are going to be automatically filled in for you based on the numbers that you enter on that table. We do need you to tell us the number of weeks per year that you're open in 2023. When we say weeks, feel free to round. So if you had a week where your library was closed for a day for a snow day, you can still call that a full week. If you have a week where your library was closed for 5 days because of a snow tornado, then you'll want to say that library was closed for the week, just rounding. Total public service hours. I put the little calculator just as a little like, woohoo, that automatic calculation is back. As far as what type of internet access, we used to ask, do you have internet access? Now we just roll it into this question. It's a drop-down menu where you select whether you have cable or satellite or fiber or any of these different things. One of the options is none. So for some reason, if you don't have internet access, which for the last, I don't know how many years all of our libraries have, but feel free to choose none if that's no longer true. And then we do ask you to check the download speed and let us know. It's another drop-down menu. It's a little, each line is a different range. So just choose the range that's closest to your download speed. If you do not have branches, if your library system consists of one administrative entity, as you will sometimes see pop up in this, so one central or main library, then you can just answer the question about how many branches you have with 0 and then just laugh to yourself as that entire section collapses and you don't even have to look at it. For everyone else who has branches, you just go through basically all of the same questions again for each of your branches. What is a bookmobile? So for those of you who have bookmobiles, you're going to get questions on how many you have, all of that. I just wanted to point out the IMLS definition of bookmobile is a traveling branch library. It is a truck or van that carries organized collection of materials. It has paid staff, and it has regularly scheduled hours that are open to the public. And all three of those have to be true for it to be a bookmobile. And I mention this because we've had people get some different vehicles. They've used ARPA money to do it. So if you have a book bike that goes into the community, still not a bookmobile. If you have a van that takes collections to nursing homes or to daycares and swaps them out, or even if you take materials to nursing homes and say, hey, you can come choose a book from us during this hour. If it is not open to the public, if it's not on a schedule, if people can't say, oh, I can go down to this corner on this time and go to the bookmobile, it does not count. You have a library outreach vehicle. You don't have a bookmobile in the eyes of IMLS. So if you have a bookmobile, you're going to be answering the same questions. Street address for a bookmobile is just where you park it at night. Where does the bookmobile live when it is not on the road? And then the very last thing in this section is going to be the total system public hour or service hours per year from the main, from the branches, from the bookmobiles, and all of those will be automatically pulled from the data you entered and calculated for you.
All right, we have a couple questions online. Let's see here. Is it okay to have a cell phone at a tiny branch instead of a landline?
Ooh, I don't know that. I'd have to go back and actually look at standards. I don't think it says anything. I will jot that down and say for sure, but we always refer to the code, and I don't know if the code, I don't believe the code specifies. So as long as you have a reliable way that if you give that number to patrons and they know they can use that to call you, my suspicion is, yeah, that's going to count.
Yeah, Jen said as long as the number is posted or publicly available.
There we
So
go.
I would just say, you know, everyone, if it's a tiny branch, you know, it needs to be something that everyone who's working at the branch has access to that cell phone, you know, and is able to check the voicemail, that sort of thing. What if the interior changes create additional public space? So let's say, I guess they maybe did renovations and they inside or
it shouldn't it shouldn't make a difference if it's public or staff space, because you should be reporting all of your square footage in that question. So if you're saying that you took some from the staff space that you expanded the public, it should still be, again, you should be reporting all square footage. Anything that adds additional square footage, you know, if you do somehow expand it so that public has more space, fantastic, give that to us as your number. But again, that number should represent your staff space and your public space in the library. It does not represent parking lots, even if you get Wi-Fi signals there, but it is within the library itself, within the confines of the building. What is your square footage?
But then would that still count for that year of the most recent structural addition or alteration to the current central library?
Oh,
potentially.
Yeah, I would say go ahead and put it in there, and then I'll have you put a note. I would love it if you could just put a note and tell us what changed in there. If you could just say added teen section or whatever, just so that when I look and say, wait a second, this updated, I'll know that that was deliberate. Okay, so for registrations, I already mentioned, we just made sure to stress that 003 was number of paid non-residents, and then we totaled them at the end. So registrations beside the registered users and resident non-user or resident users and non-resident users. We also asked for reciprocal users, the total number of plaque users, we ask how much your non-resident fee is, and that is the fee that you had in 2023. And we're going to go back to the fee, we're going to go back to 2022 survey and look at your operating expenditures per capita, and then make sure that what you used in the 2023 was equal to or more than that amount. The date the board adopted this fee. And then the question about, does your library annually purge or mark inactive accounts for those patrons who have not used their accounts for the past 3 years and do not owe materials, fines, or fees to the library? So basically, we just want to make sure that when you are counting registered users, you are not counting users who have not used their account for 3 years or more. You can still have them in your ILS if they're marked inactive or however you need to shadow them, but please don't include those inactive accounts when you're counting the number of registered users. The exception being, if they owe materials, fines, or fees, and you still have them because you're hoping to collect them, you can count them. But again, the whole point of that question is we just don't want artificially inflated numbers for people who haven't been to the library in 10 years. And then the final question, does the library charge overdue fines as opposed to replacement cost? This is truly overdue. You know, we expect all libraries to charge replacement costs. If you charge overdue fines at all, so you may have a split policy. You may say kids don't get any fines, but adults do. In that case, because this is a yes or no question, if you charge any overdue fines, the answer is yes. It's not, there's not a whole lot of shades of variant in there. It's not supposed to be a real detailed breakdown. So just yes or no. Libraries and political subdivisions. So at the very start of this, we asked you about your assessed valuation, your tax rates. These are information, the sort of information that you get from the Gateway. So the things that DLGF would provide for you that your DLGF representative might be able to help you find if you're not sure where to find them. And then the tail end of this section has to do with service area populations, which I mentioned during the updates. I will say, please check your service area populations. I know last year I was really excited because in 2022, we were finally able to get those 2020 biennial census numbers in, or so we thought. But it turns out that things keep changing and we kept having to make updates, and we worked with a different department with the state, the geographic, they use shape files. And we had somebody in this library who for certain challenging service areas was working like at a block by block level. So some of those numbers may have changed because Indiana service areas are wild. So if I think the smallest change from last year, we have one library who added 2 people to their number, but we had at least one library that had a pretty significant change once we went through there. This should not be a shock to this library, but for all the rest of you, just glance and make sure, again, we're human, we make mistakes, that we didn't mark something wrong or transpose numbers. So this front part, as I said, this is the sort of thing that would be in Gateway. So your total assessed valuation, your operating tax rate, the source here for the data. So if you do have that 2024 data, just let us know. It's 2024 right there. Your debt fund tax rate, and your library, I believe that's LCPF is Library Capital Projects Fund tax rate. Most of you probably won't have those, so don't stress out if you don't. And then did your library roll the LCPF into the operating tax rate at yes or no? Of course, that's a no if you don't have one. If you are a library system that covers multiple counties, then we'll just ask you the same set of questions for the number of counties that you're in. And then again, this is what I talked about at the start of the hour or the start of this session. We have the sections on service areas, which break down each part of your service area, your political subdivisions, into the population served by taxation or population served by contract. And then at the end, we just total up all of those subdivisions to find out how many taxed, how many contracting. This final 2 questions are really important because we don't have a great way to keep tabs of when your service area changes. And again, Indiana has some crazy rules and some wildly different definitions of service areas. And Indiana also allows for contracts. So those things we know, people add contracts, they end contracts. And if they don't let us know, we may still have a contract on your service area that has not been in effect for years, as we found out last year. So please let us know if there have been any recent changes to your service area. So mark yes for that. And then in the field, tell us, we added a contract or ended a contract, or those are mostly the two things that would happen.
There's one question online. What about if you charge overdues of interlibrary loan materials only, the overdue charge of the lending library?
Of the lending library?
Yes.
Yeah, that's you in that case, you can go ahead and say you don't charge fines. You're respecting the other library's policy, but that's not your fine policy. I don't think IMLS is going to come out after us for that. If so, I'll take the bullet for that one.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, so the question was, are we supposed to record covenant or like the reciprocal borrowing covenant users in any way? If they have their own unique card in your system, then you would, but other than that, there's really no way to track that. Any others? Okay, we're hopping into operating revenue. Let me make sure I'm caught up to speed here. So operating revenue, we just break into local, state, federal, and other categories. And for the operating revenue, for the purposes of this section, we have you just lump operating and non-operating funds together. We don't break them out like we do in expenditures. If you received a reimbursement grant for the year, just know that you should report the money that you claimed, not necessarily the money that was awarded to you. So if you were awarded $5,000 and you only claimed $4,800 of it, put down the amount that you claimed. So essentially in this section and the next one, which is expenditures, we want you to put real numbers down. We don't want you to put what was budgeted. We don't want the ideal numbers. We want the actual numbers, the money in and the money out. So for local government, that revenue is going to be your property tax, or I don't know, said it, that acronym, income from the library tax rate, your miscellaneous income taxes, your contractual revenue received for service, if you do have those contracting service areas, and then we'll automatically total that for you. We go through the state government, which is financial institutions tax, licensed vehicle excise tax, commercial vehicle excise tax. The broadband connectivity grant, that one will be pre-filled for you. In fact, I think it's already loaded in there now. That's the amount that we at the state deposit into your whatever account you have set up with us, that we try to help cover the amount that your E-rate discount, that we try to help cover the cost of internet after the E-rate discount kicks in. And it changes from year to year how much we're able to help out, but we'll go ahead and put that number for your library in there. If you have other state revenue, you can put it in that other category and then just let us know what that is. And again, we will total that for you. And finally, federal government, there should not be any LSTA grants this year unless people got them directly from IMLS. We weren't able to subgrant this year. Other federal income, if you're not sure if something's federal, you can run it past me and I'd probably be able to help you. And then total federal income. The bulk for most of you, the vast majority is going to be local. So these are state and federal are not going to have a lot in them. And then things that would go into the other category would be plaque reimbursement, fines and fees if you do collect them, interest on investments, gift receipts, public and private and public grants, miscellaneous revenue. So that's kind of our catch-all. If you're not sure where else to put it, that's a great place. And then the sources. And then we'll total your other, and then we'll total all of those categories, local, state, federal, and other, and we'll tell you what we arrived at for operating revenue. And that takes us to expenditures. Still good? Okay. So expenditures, unlike revenue, expenditures is so much longer because expenditures, we do break out operating and non-operating funds. And the reason we do this, and we have tried and looked at how we could make this easier, and there is just not a way to do it without making it a lot harder for the libraries to hit that 8% collection development standard. Because the code is worded in such a specific way in regard to that standard, we're able to basically, we take all of your operating and non-operating expenditures on collections. So from any fund, any money at all that you spend on collections, we take it into account for that that standard. And then we divide it by only technically operating funds. We don't take non-operating into account. So we're trying to give you the largest possible amount spent and divide it by the smallest number, because that's going to give you the absolute highest percentage. And that is why we break it out for you. I know it's painful. It does not match up with the FBOA report, and we are sorry about that. But if we want to try to help those libraries hit that 8%, that is why. Transfers on expenditures, transfers themselves don't count. So if you're transferring money into a LURF account or a rainy day account, if it's just a transfer, that is not an expenditure. It actually has to leave your library's budget. The operating expenditures in general are broken down by staff, supplies, and collections, and that's pretty obvious when you move through this. As I said, operating and non-operating funds are separated in this one, and that's for that collection development standard. When you get to the end, you're going to see a whole bunch of automated totals that are just insanely similar. Total expenditures for collection, total operating fund expenditures, total collection expenditures. I can't even tell you off the top of my head the differences without referring to my cheat sheet. But again, it's because in Indiana, we do those numbers so specific to try to help out our libraries. In IMLS, they don't care about operating versus none. And there's certain things that we count as a collection expenditure that IMLS does not. So if you're wondering why there's 900 different questions, it's because we've got to give them data in their way, and then we have to try to use it in our way to help you guys out. The operating staff and supplies questions, salaries and wages of all library staff. And that is going to include, so anybody who gets a W-2 from your library, employees benefits, and that includes that includes what you're paying for Social Security or taxes on your employees. So number one is the actual wages they earn. Number two is the rest of the money that you're basically paying to have them on your payroll. And it doesn't matter how great or awful your benefits are. Maybe, you know, whether you have the Cadillac of healthcare or not, whatever you're paying towards those benefits, that goes to number two. So other personal services would be employees that worked with your library that did not get a W-2. So they did not, so people you paid, again, off of your actual payroll, you just handed them a check essentially. So things like architects or engineers or repairs, repair services, someone who you paid to do work but was not on your payroll. And then we'll total those personal services and the total staff expenditures. Total supplies, it gets its one question. There it is, 006. That's it for supplies. Services and charges. So you know what? I think I did this. Oh my gosh, did I tell you the wrong thing? I certainly did. I am so sorry, guys. At least I caught it early. Okay, so other personal services. I made a distinction. I said other personal services. So salaries and wages of staff, those are your librarian and the library employees. Other personal services are those who receive a W-2 but are not technically part of your library staff. So if you have a lawyer on retainer, that would go with other personal services. The ones that I was talking about, the people that you pay who aren't on your staff and who don't get a W-2, so the people, the architects, all of those are professional services. I myself always have to go back and look at those, but that's what 007 is. Communication, transportation, printing and advertising. I'm going to skip ahead to repairs and maintenance. This one tends to get a lot of questions. If possible, we do need you to separate the cost of labor from the cost of supplies. So if you are putting a new heating unit in, the unit itself, would be reported as a supply, and then the labor to install it would be reported in the services and charges, repairs and maintenance. So this is all that's supposed to be for the work itself. If you are buying shingles for your roof, that's going to be a supply. If you are paying someone to shingle your roof, that's going to be in question 12 here. I think the rest of those are pretty cut and clear.
Yes. We'll have a few questions.
Sure.
The first one says, our gift receipts go into a gift fund. Would those still be part of the operating revenue?
Into a gift fund? Yes. I'm thinking about I had to think about that for a second. I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the caffeine to kick in this morning. Yes, they would be.
Transfers to CDs or money market accounts do not count either, right?
That is correct. Again, it only counts for an expenditure if you take money from that CD then and put it towards a project.
Our wages changed January 1st. Do we use the new rates or the rates from 2023?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So in this section, use the 2023 rate. This section is about what you paid in 2023. So look at your payroll and take the total that you actually paid. Later on in the report, we're going to say, what's the salaries you pay your employees? And then you can tell us the most current salaries. But here, we're going to look at the amount that you actually paid them for this past year.
Where do people we hire for programs go?
I would put them as professional services, because if they have a temporary, if you just are paying them for a temporary service or for, a one-off charge or for a project, but they're not on retainer, they're not on their payroll, that would just be a professional service. So your magicians, your puppeteers, they can all go there.
And can you repeat the repairs and maintenance and labor/supplies info again?
Sure. So repairs and maintenance, if you hire repair people to come in and fix something at your library, the cost of their labor is going to go in 12. Any supplies that you buy for repairing your library, any supplies that if they can give you a line, if they can separate that from the cost of their labor, which most major repair people do, the supplies is going to go in 006. If they don't separate it, I would go ahead and put it in 12. Ultimately, we're still going to be able to say, yep, this is what it costs to run a library. You have to anticipate that there's going to be repairs and there's going to be expenses. So we can point, politicians and reporters and stuff and say, look, it costs money to run libraries. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. We did get a question. So someone said, if you have a bond fund that you are paying for these expenses out of, they do get reported. Again, any money that's going out the door, this is pure in and pure out in these sections. So if you're paying money from a bond fund, wow, I'm blanking if that would be operating or non-operating. I have to think about that for a second, but you are going to report that money.
In regards to that, what if they're doing they're adding something that wasn't there before, like more sidewalk that wasn't outside? They aren't actually, they're maintaining a property, but they aren't actually fixing something.
If they're repaying, I would count that. If you look at 12, it's repairs and maintenance. So I would count that as a maintenance. So for the grounds, for the structure, for the facilities, think of it for facility expenses. If you have a major project, if you're putting in, a major addition or something like that, it's probably going to tip over into capital expenditure, which we have for capital projects, which there is a space for that.
Another question online, the gift fund question. If it's inappropriated, it shouldn't be counted, correct? It's not appropriated, but I don't think this is.
If it's not appropriated.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Let me check. I want to double check what's going to count for operating versus non on our break, and I will return to that. I want to make sure. Again, I'm got too many slides in my head right now, but I will check. You do want to report your gift funds. You want to report the money that's put into there. As far as expenditures, those are actually, they'll probably be non-operating. I'm not going to speculate anymore. I will give you an answer when I come back from the break. Anything else happening on chat?
Just a reminder to repeat questions from the live audience.
Will do. Okay, so those capital outlays from operating fund expenditures, when I mentioned that there is a space to report for major projects, for lands, for buildings, for improvements, this is where you're going to do it. So this section is for projects, for capital projects, things that are so large that you, they would usually, this is a little unusual because these are the sorts of projects that you would usually use non-operating funds for, that you would use your LRF, that you would use special appropriated, that you would funds that you put money, you appropriated money in for this project, that you earmarked for the project specifically. Usually that is where capital project money comes from, our special funds, special non-operating funds, LRF, rainy day, whatever. If for whatever reason you are paying for it out of an operating fund, this is where you're going to put it, is 518 through 521. Now, 522 is kind of an outlier here, and I'll discuss that a little bit more in a second, but that's for public access computers, tablets, and electronic media devices. So for materials that can be used in your library to access your library collection. These aren't things that you send home with your patrons, they're for in-library use. And that we consider them, we consider them as part of the we consider them towards your collection development standard, which is why we single them out. We move into operating fund, the library materials. Excuse me. So again, we're going to break it into operating and non-operating. Most of these are relatively self-explanatory. On 25 there, those audio-visual materials, microforms, and other non-printed physical materials. It's not necessarily screaming this, but if you have a library of things, if you have realia, if you have things that are non-traditional, you know, they're not books, they're not magazines, they're not audiobooks, but you can hold them in your hand and take them home with you. They check out. This is the place to put them. And then finally, I'm going to skip to 27 there, the electronic physical format, including playaways, ebook readers, and video games. I've had people say, what's the difference between 22 and 27? What's the difference between electronic media devices and electronic physical format? And the big one is 22 is a means to access your collection, and they're not meant to be checked out. They're not meant to be taken home. They're not part of the collection. They're something you use at the library to get to that collection. The ones that you check out, the e-readers that are loaded with books, the playaways, the video games, things like that, that are physical format, electronic physical format, those go in 27. It seems crazy that we have to break it into this detail, but it's because we count 22 towards your collections. IMLS does not. So we have to do all sorts of separate calculations to make that work.
What about, like, we check out laptops for use in the library, but we aren't allowed to take them outside of the library, but we actually check them out. So which one would we put it under?
Okay, so we've got, that's fine. Just a reminder here. We've had a question about if you have laptops for use in the library, you check them out to use in the library while you're there, but they're not allowed to leave. Quite honestly, I hate to say it doesn't make a difference, but in this case, I think you'd be safe either way. I would tend to, I would recommend them for 22 if it was me. But ultimately, if you put them in either, it's going to be counted where it should towards your collection development expenditures. And that's really what we're going for.
There are a few questions online. I received an ALA rural and small libraries grant for sidewalks and monument gardens. Where would I include this?
For sidewalks, I'm sorry, for sidewalks and what?
I think it's just where would she record the grant? Is that a federal grant?
Yeah, if it's ALA, I'm trying to think of, I'm skipping back a little bit here. Oh, that's going to be revenue. No wonder. If it's an other grant, that's probably, let me look up ALA for you, whether that's going to be like a private grant or whether it's going to be a federal grant, but you will want to report that in your revenue for sure. And I will get back to you on that after the break.
Okay, and back to expenditures. What about board games? Where do they go?
Oh, board games are going to be considered that realia, that physical format, non-traditional. So those are going to go in 25.
How about books that have technology built in to also be an audiobook?
Okay, so
Books
things
or
like
maybe-
Fox and Wonder Books.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what, I probably change my answer from year to year. And this is another one that as long as it goes in this general category, it's going to be counted in a way towards your collections that it should. For those playaways, ebook readers, I would probably myself lean towards putting them in 27. I see Wonder Books and I think they're kind of similar to playaways or things like that, where it's a physical thing, but it involves an electronic element. This isn't one I wouldn't lose a whole lot of sleep, because if it's in this general section, as long as you have it as an operating fund collection expenditure, you'll probably be okay.
Okay, and would circulating hotspots go into 25?
They have their own, oh no, they have their own holdings. Yes, circulating hotspots would go into 25. Okay, I mentioned that. We asked the exact same questions about collections again from non-operating funds. And again, all has to do with standards. That's why we break it out. I'm sorry. So just same set of questions. Now we're looking at non-operating. And then we have a ton of totals, but it's going to be pulling those for you and adding those up for you just based on what you answered in the previous questions. Public access computers, e-readers, electronic media devices from all non-operating funds. Total operating fund expenditures. Again, we're pulling these totals just from what you've already put in there. And some of them go to IMLS, some of them go towards us. Total capital fund expenditures is an exception on this screen in that you do need to enter a number there if you have it. That total capital fund expenditures, those would be where you put, if you spent money on a capital project from LRF, from rainy day, if you spent that specially appropriated money, this is where you would put it. And we want it separate than the other money because we don't want this artificially inflating your non-resident fee, because that's not a traditional operating expense you have. That's a special one-time mega expense. So it would go there. If you have something that you report in the next section, which is going to be capital revenue, the expenditure is going to go here, and we don't expect the revenue and the expenditure to match up. I promise you that. But any money that you spend for a major project that comes from a special fund, 44 is where you want to put it. More totals. The total 2022 operating expenditures per capita, we will preload for you. That comes from last year. And again, it's because we're looking to see if you were in standards for this past year. And as far as non-resident fees, and we know you, at the end of each year, you get that operating expenditures per capita, and that's the number that you look at and you say, for the coming year, I need to match or exceed that. So we have to go all the way back to 2022 to see if you matched or exceeded it in 2023. Then we go ahead and that's why we ask about whether your non-resident fee meets the standards. Then we go ahead and figure out your 2023 operating expenditures per capita. So what that actually was for the year. And we tell you that, hey, just keep in mind going forward into 2024, your non-res fee has to meet or exceed that number. So that's why the 2022 isn't a typo. That's just for checking your non-resident fee for the past year. And then I keep mentioning that collection standard, but you can see right there, we do figure that out for you and let you know where you're at, because you need that to meet that 8% to be in standards. Oh, the non-resident fee, I just mentioned how we calculate that. So the collection development, again, the reason this section is such a bear is because we are really trying to give everyone every edge they can have. So operating and non-operating funds, including your public access computers, things like that, divided by your total operating funds has to be at least 8%. So capital revenue, I'm going to get through this section real quick, and then we'll take a short break. Those are for those major projects I keep mentioning. So buying land, buildings, building a new library, making a major renovation, the furnishing, the equipment, that's not replacing a chair or anything. That's first time collections, first time furnishings, for that new building, for that new addition. Computer hardware and software used to support library operations. So if you have a major overhaul to your network, if you're installing fiber, if you're doing something, again, on a large scale, that almost certainly is going to involve some sort of special appropriation. It's most likely a capital expenditure. New vehicles, that's another one. And then we have a series of 5 questions that has remained unchanged since the beginning of time, and I love them for that. We just ask you local, state, federal, and other capital revenue, and then we total that up for you. And I think with that, unless there's any questions, we will head into break.
All right. I don't see any questions online. We can go ahead and take a break, but I want to mention real quick, while I have you here, captivated audience, that the invoices, the internet invoices, are due to me by this coming Monday, the 30th. So if your library has not turned those into me for the broadband connectivity grant money, please do so before then. I'm going to list the libraries that I have not heard from yet. So looking for your library's name. Bloomfield, Eastern Greene County, Cambridge City, Camden Jackson Township, Danville Center Township, Goodland and Grant Township, Hammond, Knightstown, Morgan County, Oxford, Park County, Spiceland Township, Swayze, Washington Township, Waveland Brown Township, and Williamsport, Washington Township. If I listed your library's name, you still need to send me internet invoices. There are a couple of you on this list who probably receive net for free, but you still have to tell me that every year. So if you do not send those to me by Monday, I'm going to hunt you down. So I want to give you money. Please let me give you money. All right, you can take a little break and then we'll answer questions when we come back from what, 5 minutes or
That's because let's quarter till. We'll give them 10.
okay,
can get
10 minutes, 10:45 Indy time. Come on back.
Hopefully you are back. I just wanted to clarify a couple things that I mentioned coming back to before break. There was a question about gift funds, and of course the note I wrote was not very helpful. Just to reiterate, gift funds, they're going to be recorded in revenue. There is an actual line in revenue. I don't have section 4 pulled up, but there is a line for gift funds and it's only monetary gifts. So you can't, it's like they gave us books worth this amount. So it would be reported in the gift funds line in section 4 revenue. And then the expenditure, whatever you spend it on, is going to be counted as non-operating expenditure money, along with your LERF, any of those other special funds. As far as the ALA grant, this one's driving me a little batty because ALA is not a federal grant. And it's not for-profit organization, and it's not technically, I don't believe it's a public or private foundation technically. So I'd probably just record that as other, and then just use the note to say ALA grant. But again, some of these, as long as we know about them, that's the most important thing. You said you had a couple questions?
Yes, there are some questions online. Do you only record the bond funds spent in the current reporting year versus the entire bond amount?
Correct. We are only looking at 2023. So only money going into the coffers and flowing out in 2023, regardless of the budget, regardless of how much was awarded or how much you have available, in and out, pure numbers.
Okay. Where would you report the expense of new carpet in a staff area of the library?
In a staff area, I think I would look at how large it is. Are we talking about a little break room, like a single break room? Are we talking about an entire second floor of the building? Depending on the scale of the project, I would either count that as a capital project from a operating or non-operating fund. I guess for me, the question would come down to, did you have a special appropriation for it? Are you using LERF, something like that? That would help guide me, how much money and where did the money come from? And for specifics like that, I'm always happy if you shoot me an email and we can talk over specifics for your library and say, okay, given the size and the scale, where that would probably best go.
And then the last thing is just, can you show the slide about the collection development formula again?
Oh, sure. Okay, so there we go. So again, we're just trying to give you any single penny that you spend on collection development, operating fund, non-operating fund, wherever it's coming from, and it's going on all physical materials, all electronic materials. So your databases, your Hoopla, your Canopy, things like that. The PAC. So if you're buying, computers that the public can go on, in theory, they could go on there and use your resources. So we're going to go ahead and count that towards them as well. And then we only divide it by the technical operating funds. We don't divide it by the non-operating funds. So again, we're dividing the largest possible number by the smallest possible number because we want to give you the highest percentage. Yes.
ALA is actually a nonprofit.
It is a nonprofit. Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's I'm sorry. Somebody said ALA is a nonprofit. It is a 501c3. That is correct. It's not a federal agency, so it doesn't belong there. And then for non-state government or federal, we have a line for public or private foundations, and I don't believe it's set up as a technical foundation. I think it's just set up as I don't know what you would call a non-foundation charity. It's just a not-for-profit.
Yeah, so there's not a category.
There's not a not-for-profit category, so I would put that in other. Yeah, most of our grants we do see come from small community foundations, and they would fit in beautifully in that line, but ALA I would put as another. Okay, so we're just gonna fly right back to section 7, that employment data. I already talked about one of the changes up front. When you're filling out this section, just keep in mind, answer this as if your library is fully staffed. So when it says, how many librarians do you employ? How many, staff members do you employ? If you have a job vacancy, that's still count the number of jobs you have, count the number of positions it takes to run your library. Or I tell people, we want to know, like, it takes bodies to keep a library functioning. We need to have funding for bodies to keep the doors open. So tell us about how many bodies you need to keep the doors open in your library. The ALA, as I said, it is a subset of the total. So we'll ask you for the total librarians, and then a couple questions later, we'll say, hey, out of those, how many have a degree? And then we always get questions about what is a librarian. And I hate that question, not because I think it's a bad question. I think it's a very legitimate question. I hate it because it's hard for a very data-oriented report to say, hey, that's kind of subjective. But you know what? Hey, it's kind of subjective. So IMLS gives us a definition where they say a librarian is someone who performs a task, a librarian-based task that you usually have training for in some way, and it's usually based in the rhetoric or the rhetorical or scientific aspects of librarianship, as opposed to the clerical or mechanical. Pretty sure I got that one right, which is helpful and not. So my kind of rule of thumb, the work they're doing, is it something you would learn in library school? Is it cataloging? Is there a class for it in library school? So, reference work, cataloging work, programming, all of those things I could see, there being classes for professional development, as opposed to, something that's 100% circulation, or, paging, or something, the behind the scenes that are really important to the library, but not necessarily a librarian. So again, rather than stress this, your library. Who would you call a librarian in your library? This is, at some point, it just does become subjective. So do your best. Who do you consider to be a librarian at your library? And who do you consider support staff? So with that in mind, we ask about the total number of librarians, the total number of paid hours per week, and then we calculate that full-time equivalent for you. That's based on IMLS gives us 40 is what they use for the full-time equivalent. And that's just so we can compare apples to apples across the nation. So even if your library is, 35 hours a week or something, that's fine. We're just using this for comparison sake. And we ask how many of the librarians have an ALA degree. And when we ask about librarians, please report librarians. We want people who are working library roles. So if you have somebody who has a library degree and they are working as a page and they have their library degree, but they're not working a librarian position, don't count that as a library. Again, we're trying to report, hey, what does it take to keep this body running, or this institution running? What is it? In this case, you have a bonus librarian on staff, but technically you wouldn't need to have the degree for that position. So only count the librarians who are operating in library roles for that one. When we say total number of all other paid staff, so who else is on your payroll? That's anyone who is support staff on the library. So that is from pages to business managers to HR people to maintenance, anybody else who is on your library's payroll, but you just wouldn't necessarily give them the title of librarian. And then we figure out your full-time equivalent, total number of all paid staff. Here's some automatic calculations. And then the final question, just let us know how many hours per week your library considers for someone needs to work to be full-time employment. So again, we've seen anywhere, it's usually between 30 to 40 hours. Library service and technology. So the front half of this is not quite so bad. The front half includes total number of interlibrary loans your library has provided to other libraries, evergreen transits, and circ material. So these are all questions about loans that are going out your door. And then the next series are loans coming in your door. I will point out on evergreen transits out and evergreen transits in, there was a lot of questions last year where people said, well, that number isn't the number we had. And we talked to our evergreen coordinator. The number that we want to report is the number of your materials that are going out for a loan. We're not counting materials that are just coming home to you as transits when they're just coming back to be put on a shelf. So that's why our number tends to be lower than some of the numbers you're finding. So if you're panicking, we've taken out the ones that are just being returned. The net lending rate, we just divide items loaned by items borrowed. And we use that for our purposes. I do have a blank screen. Oh, I know I have a blank screen. So here, because we're getting ready to go into programming, and this is, I have to give some sort of heads up for programming because programming, yeah. So this is my disclaimer. Libraries do so much stuff, and there is not a chance. We have the largest annual report in the nation, and we don't even come close to recording everything that our libraries do. Like you have to pick and choose. So basically, in my mind, the analogy is, if libraries have all this wonderful, consider their services like water, and we're trying to, collect them and show people this is what we do. And the IMLS and state libraries are coming with the teacup to come get that water of data. And if you're the state library, if you're our library, because we have such a big report, you're like, haha, I have a giant mug, I'm getting more data. And then we arrive at your library in your Niagara Falls. Like, we cannot get everything that you guys are doing. We possibly can't. So when we say this is a sample of what libraries are doing, these are the sample of services, it truly is. And we do know there's going to be major underrepresentation of some of the things libraries do, and we try to take that into account. But libraries evolve faster than we can keep up with, and they do more unless we wanted to do nothing but report all year long instead of doing programs. So that is why sometimes you will ask me, hey, where do I put this? And I have to tell you, on your own personal stat sheet, or nowhere, or to your board when you're bragging about it. But there is just some things that we don't record, not because we don't think they're worthwhile, but because at some point we don't want to cross the 1,000 question mark. That is not a good point to cross. We do have the reason I've grown with programming. You wouldn't think it's so hard to define a program, and then it becomes a nightmare. We do have guidance on programming as defined by IMLS. When you go to our annual report page that I shared earlier in this presentation, there's a section that has like a handout that talks about what is a program, and here's a good checklist to use. The IMLS table is also going to be available. It's in the instructions for the report, but IMLS finally got tired of listening to the state data people like myself say, hey, you need to give us more guidance. This isn't helpful. So they at least gave us some examples and what to include. So that's a little helpful. So that little person who has a secret, thank you, stock model. She shows up, whoever did this, free use stock model photos, they're fabulous because they're about the only things that we can find that we're allowed to use. So thank you, stock model person, who is my little secret for you all. This is not the definition that we are using for IMLS. This is from the National Impact of Library Public Programs Assessment from ALA from a few years ago, but it's such a fantastic definition to kind of help gauge where it is that I've started kind of on the fly telling libraries about it, so subtle here at a workshop. So this is not IMLS's definition, but it's so great. A program is an intentional service or event in a social setting developed proactively to meet the needs or interest of an anticipated target audience, at least some of whom attend by choice. So that means you have to put in effort into the program. You can't, so things that kind of happen on the fly. I've had people say, we have maker spaces, and there were a bunch of people, so I went over there and we just did something together. It wasn't proactive, it wasn't intentional, it was awesome, but other people didn't know it was available, you couldn't plan to show up to it. The some of whom attended by choice, that sometimes people go, oh wait, but what about summer reading visits to the schools, or what about story times at daycares? Their institution has opted into it. Their institution has chosen and said, yes, we would like you to do this. So, and also most schools and daycares will provide alternate programming for teachers or classes if they don't want to. So don't even worry about that. But the whole idea of an intentional service in a social setting to meet needs or entertainment, that's a great rule of thumb. It's not IMLS's definition, but sometimes when it's on the fence and I'm going back and forth with people, that helps kind of push us one way or the other. And the other thing I say, and I know some people hate this, and I understand as a data person as well, This is somewhat subjective. At some point, you just have to do a gut check and say, yeah, that's a real programmer. No, I'm kind of stretching it, and put it down and go home and see your lovely family and your lovely pets and go to sleep at night and everything will be okay. So programs we used to just collect a little data, and recently IMLS really wanted more data points, especially with the huge surge in virtual programming that we saw in COVID. So now what you see here is the little flow chart of the program breakouts that we ask for. So we ask you about synchronous programs, and those include those in-person ones, which are your traditional library programs, and virtual, which we saw a whole bunch of during COVID. So virtual, it has to happen live though. So it has to be something that someone has to tune in and live stream to see it happening at that specific time. If it's in person, we'll ask you how many were on site on your library campus, how many were off site. So, you know, at community centers or adult daycare or, you know, church groups, wherever, when you go off site. And we ask, so on site and off site for in person. Virtual, we don't ask it, it's virtual. It exists out there on the web. And then for all of those, we break it into who is your target audience. So is it 0 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 through 18, 19 and up, or general? So we ask that, and we'll ask who it is and how many people showed up. So all of those for on-site, all of those for off-site, all of those for virtual. And then as a separate category, we do ask about asynchronous programming, and that would be the story times that you record and post to the web. And you don't do them live, you just do them in a room with someone holding the camera or a tripod, and then you post them for people to watch at their own leisure whenever it makes sense for them. And I did all of this preface so that hopefully we can just skip through a lot of these slides. So again, we will ask you to report for live in-person on-site program sessions, how many you had for each of these age categories. We'll ask you that about off-site program sessions. This isn't the same slide. If you look, the word off-site is now in there. Otherwise, yes, it is. We'll ask you the same questions for virtual programs. How many did you have for little kids? How many did you have for middle-aged kids? How many? Again, it's just so much breakdown. We ask about attendance, not a rule of thumb, the way you should be counting attendance. How many heads are in the room? Like, how many people are there? Do a head count. It doesn't matter if they actually are part of the target audience. So if you're doing a story time, count the kids and then count the caregivers. So grandmas, parents, all of them are going to count. If you're doing a little kids program and teen brother tags along, or usually it's vice versa, if you're doing an older kids program and the little brother thinks it's so cool and wants to sit in, count all of the bodies in the room. You told us who it was targeted to earlier, but now we're just looking at how many people actually showed up. General interest programming, a little note about that as well. That is to be used when you have a program that is specifically meant to appeal to multiple age groups. And it is not meant to be a workaround for the 0 to 5, 6 to 11 division. I know this is, a lot of people were really annoyed with breaking kids programs into 0 to 5 and 6 to 11. And they said, yeah, ours ranged that entire way or right in the middle. And we're sorry, IMLS wanted this because they wanted to kind of point to early literacy and early programming as a separate category. So if you have a program and you're like, it's a kids category and it's kids 0 to 5 and it's kids 6 to 11, it's general interest. No, that's really not what it's meant for. It's supposed to be multiple age groups and not just those two kids ones. And so if you have, and that includes young adults as well. So if your multiple age groups are all youth, it doesn't count as youth. If your multiple age group is a youth and then adult or something like that. So think family game nights, think, you know, things that are meant to appeal to the whole family or to larger groups. So again, we ask this on-site, we ask this off-site, and then we ask for the virtual program sessions. We ask you how many people show up, and it is required by IMLS that we ask you to count that by the number of participant devices. So how many people were logged in for that live virtual program? And this does mean that it is going to be a lower number than actually showed up, because you're going to have people show up who are sharing a screen. You're going to have moms with their kids on one device. You may have a classroom that a teacher hooked up, one teacher and 30 kids, and that counts as one device. It is underreported. We have said this to IMLS. We take it with a whole shaker of salt, but that is the number that's actually required. Now, we do provide you, if you count the participants, if you try to count the heads in the little people watching you, if you try to be more accurate and you want to record that so you can track it over the years and you can kind of look around peers who have also recorded that, fantastic, but those are not required. We ask the whole number of live programs in person and synchronous virtual. We do a whole lot of sums. We add a bunch of stuff together. I'm not going to go through all of these because just know everything on this screen and everything on this screen are all auto calculated for you. They're just a million different ways to look at the data. Total number of recorded asynchronous presentations. Again, that's going to be those things that you post that you have created. So if you're linking to Reading Rainbow's site, if you're linking to a Storytime site or something like that, it's not going to count. But if you create content and put it up there, programming content, that's what we want. And then the total number of views of those programs for the first 30 days. We ask about the number of weeks of a children's reading program that your library offers. Those don't have to be consecutive. They can be broken up. So if you do 3 weeks in the summer and 2 weeks in the winter, or hopefully 4 weeks in the summer, we're looking for multiple weeks, but you don't have to do them all in a row. So if you do have a winter program, if you have a fall program, that's fine. Just tell us how many weeks you have. The last two, total number of non-library sponsored programs and total attendance at non-library sponsored programs. These are basically just trying to gauge, are there groups in your community that are using your meeting room? And this is always a point of contention. How do we count them? And how do we know if it's truly an open group or what if it's a study group? Do your best on that. I will say this is a number, we didn't get the change made this year, but those are going to be altered in some way for future years because I just think they're too ambiguous and I think we can do better at tracking meeting room and study room use than this. I think we can either, we can change it to find something more accurate, but this is not where it's at. So do your best with those. If you have groups coming in to use those rooms, it's a way of telling us, yes, we're still a community service area. We're still that third space for some people.
Okay, questions online. With the disruption of services with the courier this year, will this be accounted for in our figures?
Oh, in transits or whatnot?
Yes.
It will, the figures are going to look probably horrendous compared to other years. We're the ones who are collecting that data. That is for us. And we are very aware of that. So we know why everyone's going to be down across the board. I'm trying to, what IMLS will get is actual circulation, and I prepare the data files for IMLS and I can make them aware that we had massive transit failures this year that resulted in less materials checking out than what that's going to be my own annotation, my own note that I add to IMLS. We have no way of projecting, well, it should have been this. We have to report what actually happened, but we can report the circumstances to them.
If we record and then post synchronous virtual programs, do we count the asynchronous views / hits also?
So yes, and this is different than previous years. This changed last year, I believe. If you record something live and then you say, I'm going to post it online for people to watch later, IMLS said, hey, that's actually serving two purposes. Those are two different audiences. Those are people who can come to live programs and those are people who have different needs. So you get to count that one twice. We used to only count it once, but you get to count it as one synchronous and one asynchronous, and you get to count the live people and the live attendance, and you get to count the hits and the hits. You get to count everything for that.
Does all the bodies in the room include presenters or other people helping to facilitate?
Oh, no, that's a good no. No, the people who are working on the program, so your facilitators, your librarians, the presenters, they do not count. It's the people who showed up to take in the program.
So if I have a program that is marketed towards tweens and teens, about ages 9 to 14, I should just pick one or the other age category for reporting?
Absolutely. It's not ideal, but that's where we're at right now. If you're really struggling because all of your programming is right in the center, split them, say half of them I'm going to count as little kids, half I'll count as adults, you know, or try to ration them out as makes sense. Or you just want to report them in one of the kids categories. And we don't want you to use general because we'd rather, if you have a program that's aimed towards kids, whether they're little kids or middle kids, I still think it's, we as, you know, the data collectors nationally, they still think it's really important to be able to say to stakeholders, to legislators, to people that like we do, this is the youth programming we do. So I'd rather have those counted in the youth bucket, even if that youth bucket is, you know, maybe not quite as accurate as, well, it should be 0 to 11, at least put it in one of those as opposed to general, which is just something entirely different. At least let it be known it's a youth program.
If we don't have any recorded programs or provide any virtual programs, is there a way to skip this section?
I have actually asked Bibliostat about this. I'm going to see if there's a way we can leave this blank. I believe there is. And we'll try to make that clear in instructions, but this is something we are still finalizing the report, but I'm trying to do that where you can leave it blank and it's going to let you submit it if you leave it blank. Or maybe we'll just ask a question at the top, like if you hit 0, we had 0 programs, it will let you skip the rest. So we're working on that.
Did you say a story time at a daycare or preschool is not considered a program?
No, it is considered a program. We're saying that some people point to the definition and say, well, hey, you can't opt in. Well, the kids not so much, but the school or the daycare did opt in. So yes, that is definitely a program.
If I heard correctly, study rooms and conference rooms are included in the non-library sponsored programs.
Traditionally, we have only done meeting rooms, and I ask you to only count meeting rooms this year. But one of the reasons we're looking to change it or figure out what to do with it or boot it entirely is because it doesn't take into account study rooms. And we have a lot of people very angry about that because the study rooms are what's popular. So do the best you can this year with meeting rooms. Don't sweat it too much. Yeah.
We live stream some programs on Facebook. Facebook counts views, but they are really only 3 seconds. How should we count that?
We have a guide that I post online that is entirely how to get metrics for your live streaming programs. And they have Facebook listed on there and they tell you what metrics you should use. Because I don't remember off the top of my head if it's that 3-second count or if there's something else. But I would recommend you look at that. And if you want me to steer you towards that, just shoot me an email off list and I'll help you find that information. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pause the programming questions. I'm sure there's more. I want to make sure we get through the rest of this. If there's time at the end, I can take some more. Or, you know, my inbox is always open, but I want to make sure it's so easy to get lost in the weeds on program. We could do this all day. And this is not a reflection on like, oh, the library. This is a reflection on how terrible the definition is or how hard it is to pin them down. Number of visits to the library and reference transactions. Tell us what they are, and then we also ask you just to select whether it's an actual account or an estimate. So some people have door counters, some people, you know, count the patrons for a week and then extrapolate. Whatever you need to do, we just want to know. Again, it makes it easier for us to compare apples to apples nationally on the data sets. And then instructional reference services, those are for reference questions that just are much more time intensive and involved, helping people put books on their Kindle, helping people, you know, how do I use this resume program online? We've all had them and we've all said, wait a second, those only count for one, even though I spent half an hour with that person. And this person over here said, yeah, the 5th book in the James Patterson murder series is blah, 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 and they get the same credit. Well, first of all, we don't do credit, but yes, it is frustrating and they are different types of reference. So if you are a library that separates out your instructional reference services, because a lot of libraries track that for their own internal purposes, there is a space you can put it on here. It is optional. Do not feel like you need to start tracking it for our sake, but if you do, then you can put that subset. Everybody else, we need the total number of reference, and then if you break it out, tell us that subset. We'll fill in the state license databases for you. The little pencil down there, that is the category we're trying to carry over from previous years. So we're going to preload that for you based on what you typed in there last year. We ask that you just take a look and make any changes as needed. So if you dropped a subscription, just delete it from that list if you've added one. But hopefully this will save some of the libraries that have so many databases, save you a little bit of heartache. The number of public internet computers, the number of sessions, The reporting method, again, that's going to be actual versus estimate, depending on how you get those numbers. Same with wireless internet uses. We ask for the number of internet computers system-wide, the number of website visits. So little preview for next year. We do need number of website video visits, but that is likely going away in the future. So please do your best to wrap us up on a positive note and we can work with that data set. But if you're someone who hates this for a number of reasons, it may not be on the horizon forever. The name of your library's automated bookkeeping system. We're preloading it. So if it changed, please just go in there and change it for us. Circulation and holdings. So this is exactly what it looks like. How many things do you have in your library? How often do they go out? Circulation of physical items is usually pretty easy to understand. The use of electronic materials versus successful retrieval of electronic information gives me nightmares. It sounds easy on the surface. It causes problems. In a nutshell, number 2 is going to be things that have loan periods that have finite use. So your overdrive, books, things like that. Whereas retrieval of electronic information, they used to say, oh, that's databases. And then Hoopla existed. Hoopla is really what's breaking us. So there is more instruction online. There's instruction in the survey itself as to what you count, because those lines have really started to bleed as far as loan periods or subscription models. So we have a what goes where handout that we update every year. We haven't done 2023 yet. That is going to go up hopefully within the next week or so. But that will tell you if you have Hoopla, this is where you report it. It's a successful retrieval or it's use of electronic information. If you have Canopy, if you have ABC maps, whatever you have, the really popular ones, we try to steer you because it's just a nightmare. And again, these are some of the major changes we're looking at in the future. We acknowledge these are a nightmare. So there may be some changes coming that will hopefully make it a lot easier. I mentioned earlier that we added the word physical to children's circulation of children's materials. If you were counting the electronic checkouts, please stop doing that. And we'll do a bunch of totals for you. In-house usage of materials, that goes in 9. As far as holdings go, we will pre-fill your numbers for you if you are part of the Indiana Digital Library, which I believe 200 of our 236 libraries are. So 36 libraries, I'm sorry, you're on your own, kid. Everybody else, we will plug in the name of your consortium. We'll plug in how many ebooks you have, how many audio materials you have, and how many video materials you have. So those will go in there. With that, I'm going to add a little note I should have added at the top. There will be some things that the state's going to pre-fill for you, and it will say on the survey, this number will be provided for the state. And that will be things like Circs transits, ebook consortium numbers, things like that. We can't actually get you most of those numbers until it's 2024. We can't tell you how many transits you've had while the year's still going on. So those numbers are not going to be filled in December. They're probably not going to be filled into mid-January because we have to pull a lot of reports and plug in a lot of data. So don't panic if it's not there right away. It is a slow-moving vehicle. We ask about video materials and audio materials. And again, we ask you to tell us, do you belong to a consortium? We'll fill that in for most of you. How many you have? Do you have ones that you have purchased only for your library? So only your library patrons can access them. You would count that as a local holding. Does your library circulate hotspots? That's a yes or no one. Other circulating physical items, this is where you're going to put your crazy stuff, your cake pans, your power tools, that would go in there. Anything that doesn't count easily as a book, as a physical, audiobook, CD, or as a video, DVD, things like that, usually goes in 26. That's kind of the catch-all category for physical items. Oh, okay. So I thought we had another slide. We did not. That's okay with me. We good to move on? Oh, we got 12 minutes, so we're gonna.
Yeah, there's one question just real quick. How do you
Sure.
add ebooks that are not part of the consortium, like GBRL? I put 13 says ebooks, local.
Yeah, if it's something that you bought for your patrons, that's what we mean by local. It's just only available at the local level at your library. The library board, I'm so sorry, guys. I know you hate filling this out every year. This is actually, we do not publish it, but we have to use it so often at the library. We work with boards so much. And it's also important to make sure that you have the right appointments, that no one's on for their 15th term, things that can't happen. So library board, we just ask you to fill in information for each of the different people serving on your board. This is one of the ones. Tell us who is on your board at that moment that you're filling it out. Because this is really the only way we get this information comprehensively. At the end of the section, we'll ask you what day of the month is your meeting and what time it is. Salary and benefits. This is a section that we don't give to IMLS. This is just for Indiana libraries, and it is probably the one that I get the most questions about after the report closes, in the sense that this is the one that everybody says, hey, have you posted it yet? We're going to ask you to just say, there's a series of positions, and we say, hey, what's the salary range on this position? And what we're asking by that is, if you were to hire someone today, if you were to post the job, what would you consider posting that position at? And that's really what this is for. It's to help your fellow librarians figure out what a good, a fair wage is for the different positions there, what a competitive wage is. You know, what is a Class C library paying for a children's librarian these days? It's a way to help with that. So we do have a couple of questions up front. We'll ask the annual salary of the director, and we'll ask the level of certification. That's the level that they have, not the level that they need to have. Tell us what they actually have in 3. And then you'll just have a ton of blocks that look exactly like that with positions filled in for you. And here's where you tell us if they have a required certification level, you can put it in there, and then the minimum and maximum. And I just encourage you, think about if you were to post this position, what it would post for. You are going to find that there may not be titles that match up exactly with your titles, especially some libraries that are kind of getting away from words like manager. We see managers being avoided a lot. If you have something that doesn't quite match, just do your best to match up the position. You know, is it roughly the equivalent to a branch director? Okay, maybe our IT person has a different technical title, but they're the head of IT. Or maybe you have something different for your Indiana room person, but that would count as a genealogist, historian, whatever. So try to find something that's relatively close. And if it's really confounding you, let me know. We ask about a whole bunch of benefits. We ask whether you provide them for full-time employees, and you can see them on there. If you put any money towards these things, you're going to say yes. So again, even if your health insurance is not great, if you're putting anything towards that, you're still going to say yes on there. We also ask about part-time employees. We ask about paid time off, and again, we break this down for full-time and part-time, as well as full-time support staff and part-time support staff. And we're just asking the different number of days that you provide for these different things. If you're a library that has a time off bank, a PTO, just as a lump number, you can tell us in 530. You can say, you know, we don't break out funeral, holidays, personal. This is the amount they get. Plaque loans is just you're reporting the number of loans, plaque loans to every different library. It's a really long section just because we have 236 sections to list out. This is one of the few times I know I said, put in a 0 if you actually mean 0. You don't have to do it in this section. We're not going to make you type in 0 for hundreds of times. Just, you can leave those blank. Just enter the ones that you did loan to. At the very end, it will total it for you. Please make sure if you had plaque loans, check that total at the end. We had one library one year that for whatever reason, I don't know if they didn't hit save. I don't know if there was a glitch in Bibliostat. They didn't have a number at that. So at the end, when they're like, hey, we think we're eligible for some of the reciprocal or the plaque loans, that number wasn't in, and it was so frustrating and upsetting for them. So just make sure your number is in there.
We have an HSA, but the library does not contribute toward it. Do we say we have an HSA or not?
Oh, I'm going to say yes with that one. If I change my mind, I'll make sure it's known on the listservs, or I'll mention it in the instruction letter I send out, but I do believe that is a yes.
So to health stipend go in health insurance or other?
Oh, I'm thinking it's other. Yeah, that's what we're leaning towards other. Again, if I change my, if I talk to our supervisors and other people and they say, oh no, put it in other, unless you hear otherwise.
I asked this last year, but how are temporary certifications counted? I'm operating on a temporary certificate while I finish library science college classes.
I would report, if it's for a director is a position, the only one that we ask specifically for. So if that's your situation, I would report what you report your temporary certification, report the level that you currently have, and then you can use a note and just use the little note field and tell us, temporary while working on classes. If there's any follow-up, our certification officer, Rose, she'll follow up with you, but she knows what's going on with all of this stuff. So she'll make sure everything we need to know, we have that. The compliance with standards section, this is one where we've had people say, can't you just autofill it for us? This is like 900 times of just saying yes, yes, yes. But again, because this is our only tool for checking standards, we want it to be purposeful and thoughtful. And we want you to say, yeah, I do have a long range plan. And yeah, we do make sure to check this many times a year. So I apologize. It's the same every single year. It just goes through the standards as listed in codes and says, do you have this? Do you have this? This year, we used to have some questions that said, if you answer no, why? And we just took those off because we have section 14 for that. So just go through and answer whether your library complies with all of these. We ask about, board and director things. Do you have a separation of duty? We do have a whole list of policies that are required. So we'll ask about those, whether you have those. All of these are yes, no questions, whether you do or not. We'll ask about your bylaws, and we'll ask whether you have your most recent copy on file. So let that be a little reminder. If you haven't sent us your updated bylaws, we need to have them. So just send them our way to LDO, statewide services. Does your library have a written collection development plan? These are all plans and policies again. What year did your plan begin? So this is another thing we need on file. We need your current long range plan. So little reminder, if you forgot to share it with us, go ahead and send it to us now. And what I will mention too, if you're doing a long range plan, this right here, this section of the code, this part of standards, that can be your little checklist for what goes into it. That is literally what we're checking it against when we're looking. So we just make sure you have all of those. We are pre-filling the local reciprocal borrowing agreements this year. So if you've said yes in the past, you have them. We're going to fill those in for you. Just make sure they're still accurate. We ask about resource sharing because libraries are required to have one resource sharing thing out of this list. So as long as you have one of these things, if you say, yes, we're part of the statewide, or yes, we do ILLs, or yes, we use OCLC, as long as you have one of them, yes, we're evergreen, you're fine. You don't need to have all of them. We ask about, again, this just comes straight from the codes, whether you have adult, young adult, and children's services, access to your materials. We ask about your website and make sure it has all the things on there it needs to have. We'll go through that. Statement of intent to comply. If you said no to any of them, just tell us why, because sometimes there are legitimate reasons that your library couldn't, meet that standard. And if you think you can plead your case and let us know what's going on, that's the perfect place to do it. We'll follow up with you. We want to help libraries get in standards. So, tell us what we need to know to help you get in standards. Supplemental questions, these change every year. This year we ask whether you faced a materials challenge. And I think most all libraries could say, yes, we've had patrons complain about our materials. But for the purposes of this, did it escalate to the point where an actual, the formal reconsideration process was started, where someone's completed a request for reconsideration form, rather than just talking to you, rather than taking one and disappearing off the face of the earth, you actually had to go through and start that process. We have take and make activities. This has been on there for a couple years. If you count them, please record them here. We're trying to figure out what to do with this one because some libraries feel very passionately about recording this and having more things like passive programming. Others don't. So if you count them, please count them there. And then we love the final question. What's something your library did in the past year you're proud of? We do read through all of those here. And let me tell you, they're a fantastic boost for us. And hopefully you enjoy getting to brag on them because again, the survey doesn't capture nearly all that you do. So if there's something you really want us to know, and there's no good place to put it, brag on your library. That's all that is for. Just brag on your library, because then we can in turn brag on Indiana libraries and share this. And I will say, having worked with IMLS, there are stories I've shared about grants and different things we've done that do get passed on to a higher level. They say, oh, can we use this example? So that's always good. Submitting the report, you're going to have to clear edit checks before you submit the report. Please be sure to read the edit checks. You can put in an annotation. You can say, yes, this number is correct. 4 of our 5 staff members quit, so we didn't have near the number of programmings, or the edit check is just going to flag something where the computer says this number is outside the boundaries of what we expect. It increased by too much. You had 5 times the circulation of last year, or it decreased by too much, or it was the exact same number of last year. If you have the exact same number of circulations last year as this year, you're going to get an edit check because that doesn't sound right to us. Sometimes those numbers, they are correct and you can tell us that. Sometimes they are really wonky, but there's a good reason for it. Like I mentioned, staff changing, maybe, oh gosh, we took all of our money from physical materials and bought nothing but electronic materials this year. That's why that number's so high. Great, tell us if that's the case. I do ask that you read those edit checks because sometimes we get people who just cut and paste the same answer into every single one. And it will say, hey, you said that you spent $20 million on audiobooks. And then later on, you said you had 0 audiobook circulations. That doesn't mesh up. And they'll say, we bought lots of audiobooks. Okay, but that's not what the audio. So please just be sure to read it. It'll save you having to answer calls or emails from me later on because I can be very persistent and very annoying. So just save yourself the trouble. If you're wondering what an edit check is, please watch the little tutorial on how to use Bibliostat. Once you clear the edit checks, once you get the little all 3 green check marks of happiness, you can hit submit. You're not going to get a pop-up page. Bibliostat doesn't have a way to yeah, you're done. Once you have submitted your report, once I get your signature page, I go in personally and make sure the report has been properly submitted, and I will send you an email that says, thank you for successfully completing this and sending me the page. If something's missing, I will let you know what's missing. So you won't get confirmation right away, but you will get confirmation. So celebrate, yay, you're done. And oh no.
Oh, it took away your.
It took away, well, sorry, there were little bats in a hat because again, it's before Halloween. We never do it this early. And I am just the master of horrible Photoshop. I mean, you saw it with the ducks. That was a good 30 seconds of hard work. So yeah, I lost another one. We're at 11:30. If there are any last minute questions, otherwise I'll let people go. And I will say, if you think of a question now, please, 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 just I cannot stress this enough. My inbox is open. I will reply to you. If I do not reply to your question, every now and then I'll be going through my inbox and I'll say, wait, why is this as a draft? And because I just didn't hit send. So if you're like, well, Angela says she'll answer questions, but I sent her one a month ago and she never answered. No, it should never take me a month. It should take me a day, 2 days. If nothing else, you'll get an email saying, I'm working on this because I have no idea. You broke me. Let me get back to you. If you don't get confirmation that, if you don't get an answer, if you don't get confirmation that I'm just like the little spinning wheel, but I'm trying to get out of it, something went wrong. So don't hesitate to say, hey, it's been 2 or 3 days. I just wanted to make sure you got it. I won't think you're pushy. I'll just think that I get like hundreds of questions during the season and sometimes they slip through. So
The screen keeps going black for me. Anyway, thank you, Angela. We are going to go ahead and, oh, there's one question. If staff, okay, well, here we go. This is the last question I'm going to ask her. So if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and email them to Angela. But if staff assist patrons with accessing computers, are they considered librarians?
Do you think they're librarians? The other things that they do, the bulk of their job, is that a librarian job? Are they going and are they helping them with complex things, or are they walking over there and saying, here's how you put in your password, here's how you're doing that? If it's the latter, and if they spend most of their time doing, mechanical or repetitive things, I would say that is support staff. If they say, here's how you use the computer and let me sit you and walk you down through this, and this is what I do 90% of my day, that's probably more of a librarian. Like, what do you consider them at your library? That's really, do you think they're a librarian?
All right, thanks. So we're going to go ahead and take our break. It is 11:33 a.m. We are going to come back at 1 p.m. Indy time for the bookkeeping portion of the workshop. In the chat, I am putting a link to request LEU certificate. So you can click on the form and it'll say, do you want an LEU certificate for the morning or the afternoon or both? If you fill it out and say you want both, then you don't have to do it for this afternoon. And the link that I put in the chat that has the handouts, that also has the link to the PowerPoint for this afternoon. So just keep that in mind, and we will see you at 1 p.m.
Okay, stop sharing.